spend your life working at something that you don't enjoy, it's a waste of the world. There's so many great things out there. You may not make as much money, you may have more hardship and have to work harder, but it isn't work if you're doing what you really like. I began sailing way back. I guess the first time I really remember sailing was in Dredge Harbor on the Delaware River, way up above Philadelphia. I thought I was some kind of an ancient mariner. Sailing, of course, embodies a whole lot of different phases of seamanship, far more than a motorboat. And I seem to love the challenge of setting sails the proper way, making a vessel perform by nature's wind power rather than through engine power. The actual tactics of sailing haven't changed since the beginning of time. A sailor from my time had to sail by the seat of his pants. He didn't have these fancy electronic aids. You had to learn the old-fashioned way, and you obtain a sixth sense. You obtain a sense of how far the vessel is sailing, what the wind is doing to you, what the weather's doing to you, and how the vessel is responding. The Adventure had no engine in her, so she was pure sail vessel, relied entirely on her sails. In doing so, you had to think way down the road of your alternatives. If you have an engine, you can stop the boat immediately, turn around and go the other way. Navigation now is duck soup. With a GPS, you always know where you are. With a radar, you'd always know where everybody else is. So sailing is certainly very different now. It's so much easier, so much more precise, but you know, there are a lot of questions answered by modern technology. This was back in about 1969. It was a normal passage, we thought. We started out from beyond Mosquito Island there, down in Muscongas Bay. Muscongas Bay is a bay full of ledges. It's like some kind of a graveyard. There are tombstones everywhere that you could hang your vessel up on. So we set up our course for the lighthouse there on the bitter end of the Muscle Ridge Channel, Whitehead Light it's called. And picked out our course. Of course, we figured the tide, we figured the wind and what kind of drift there would be. And back in those days, we didn't have any kind of GPS or any kind of radar. We had what we called a compass and a lead line. They were our tools. So we're headed off towards Whitehead Light. And I could hear the horn on Whitehead Light when we were about 3 miles from it. Horn just as plain as could be. And then all of a sudden, we entered a fog bank. That horn disappeared. We couldn't hear a vestige of that horn. And here I am with 45 people in my charge on this vessel. We're headed for a lee shore, nothing but breakers and rocks along that lee shore, trying to find this lighthouse, which had a horn that you could hear for about 15 miles on a good day. And we couldn't hear a vestige of that horn. All of a sudden I said, this is it. My stomach was in knots, my patience ran out. I wound that wheel around right hard starboard, just as hard as I could. I fetched up on the stop on the end of it, and I stood on that spoke to try and get her to steer just a little bit more, because I was turning around at that point. This vessel, 122 feet long, her waterline 100 feet, she weighed 230 tons. She didn't turn very quickly. It takes her a half a mile to do a U-turn. So we got her ranged over across the wind then. And all of a sudden, through that fog, there was a corridor, and it went right up to that lighthouse at Whitehead Light. I could see the lighthouse right there. It wasn't more than a half a mile away. It was right there in front of us, and that horn came blasting right, almost knocked us off the deck. But had we continued on, probably half of them would drown. How long would I be in jail? Who knows? This is one of the chances that you take. Doing what your forefathers are doing in a vessel without an engine in it, nothing but answering nature's call. I can't think anything better. I came to Maine chasing the schooners. Went to work on these two old schooners, the Mattie and the Mercantile at that time. This was 1963. Didn't like it at first, but by and by I realized there was something in Maine that the rest of the country didn't have. There was an honesty, there was a tremendous sense of pioneer spirit in Maine back in that time, and I loved it. I was able to buy a vessel called the Stephen Tabor. Best thing I ever did in my whole life. Now, she was a vessel built in 1871, the oldest commercial sailing vessel in the United States. It was only 6 years after Lincoln was shot in the Ford Theater. If you come here and you live with the people and you work alongside them shoulder to shoulder, you spend the winter here and survive like they are, doing all kinds of things necessary to survive, whatever you have to do, why then they accept you. These two guys with long hair and ponytails and big glasses and an outfit certainly not State of Maine kind. They said, "Captain, we want to make a remake of the movie Captain's Courageous." I said, "What a great idea, boys." I said, "This is a terrific idea. I own the only Gloucester fishing schooner still sailing in the country." They said, "Yeah, we know that, Cap." I said, "And the Roseway, the schooner Roseway right alongside her, she's a Gloucester fishing model as well. This whole movie is about Gloucester fish boats." They said, "We know that, Cap." I said, "In the Adventure, she's a clone of the Aretha Spinney, the exact same model of the Aretha Spinney that did the 1937 movie. That's why we want her, Cap." I said, "Boys, step into my office. We'll work out the details." The star of the movie was Carl Malden with his big red nose. Ricardo Montalban, he was the dory fisherman. And there were others, Fred Gwynn and Jeff Corey and so on. I was in the movie. I had a beard, and it was a scraggly old thing. We got out offshore, and of course the vessel's jumping up and down. They all were seasick. They were taking Dramamine. If they went down below, they'd get sicker. If they came up on deck, they'd get colder. And by and by, they settled down and became pretty good shipmates. The artists came, and they went to work on that vessel, and they turned it into an old fish boat and did a wonderful job of it. They had dories all over the decks. They had buoy kegs, you know, and all this trawl and all this gear there, and it was wonderful. And I thought, geez, we're going to have a great movie. But when the director and producer arrived, it was hurry up here, hurry up there, get this done. Authenticity went right down the drain. We had a ghost aboard the Adventure. Captain Jeff Thomas was an all-time highline skipper out of Gloucester. Caught more fish and made more money for his owners than any man at that particular time. And he was shoveling ice, knocked off the rigging, shoveling it over the side, and the exertion of that created a heart attack. He fell dead on deck. Captain Jeff, when I had the vessel here in Maine, used to come and visit us. We were anchored in this little cove, and something, I was sound asleep, came and pinched my arm. I woke up, jumped out of bed. I'm always half awake. You never sleep when you're responsible for that kind of thing. I ran up on deck. I looked around, and my God, here were the ledges right behind me. The vessel had changed her position during the night. And I ran right away, of course, got my crew. We got a yawl boat going. We dragged the vessel up ahead so that she would be clear of the ledges. We set our other anchor, and I came back down, and afterwards wondered, what on earth, how could this happen? And I could still feel that pinch on my arm. I lay it to Jeff. He came down. His vessel was in danger. There were so many absolutely golden, glorious days sailing that vessel across Penobscot Bay. She was a living, working museum with a little angle of heel, just parting those seas and watching the water bubble out underneath her hull. I can't think anything better. You got to follow your own star in this world, do as best you can do, and you know, do the thing that you love most.